and just talk about participation. You know, 2 years ago, when I first came in office, more like 3 years ago now, I came in with the experience I had had in my life, which was as a teacher, and I was very interested in civic education. And actually, I came into politics because of my children. And I think a lot of people come into office through their children or through their families or some issue they care about. And that was it for me. You know, I had 3 children, and one of them, I was concerned that his math program wasn't good enough, that he was, you know, he needed more advanced work. And, you know, we all think our children need more, whatever it is. And I ran into a bunch of other parents who also felt the same way. So we banded together, and we started a parents group because we wanted a better math program for our kids. And that sort of started it. At the time, I was working in the PTA, and I was, you know, baking cookies and earning money for the school, because that's what we do here, you know, in the schools, to try to get a little extra money for the programs at the school. And I never really thought I'd do more than that, honestly, but I just got committed to this cause. And I ran into another woman who had done a lot of politics, political action. And what I did is I learned how to do that from her, mostly because she was also in this parent group. And she said, no, you don't just sit there baking cookies. What you do is you organize. And I said, well, what does that mean? You know, what do you mean organize? She said, you have to go to the school board and tell them what you want. But you can't just go by yourself. And we can't just go with 10 people. We have to have a list of people, and we have to convince them that we need this, and we have to have a whole lot of other people's names on that piece of paper to show that we're petitioning for something we want. So we had to figure out how to get the names of the other parents, and we each had kids in different classrooms, and we got their names, and we talked to all these people, and we got about 100 people to agree that they thought they needed a different math program. And it took a lot of convincing in some cases. We went to the school board, and we fought for it, and it wasn't just one meeting, it was several meetings. And so that's what happened. We got the new math program. So that was really my first experience with politics. Not that I wasn't pretty opinionated and argumentative, I guess, when I was younger, but you know, it wasn't really, I just really had no aspiration for public office. And then at some point, someone said to me, you know, you'd be really good at this. Why don't you join the town committee? I said, what's the town committee? Well, it turns out that if you really want to be active in politics in this country, you need to belong to a party or some group of people who feel like you do about something. And so in my town, there was the Democratic and the Republican town committees. I was asked to join the Democratic town committee, so that's the one I joined. And there's a message there, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. So, okay, so I joined the town committee. Before I know it, they have me running for the school board. Well, you know, that's not exactly an easy job, really. And I had 3 kids. I wasn't sure I wanted to spend all my time going to meetings at night. So, but I agreed to run. They didn't have anybody else to do it. I actually lost my first race. I ran against someone who had lived in town for a lot longer than I did and knew all kinds of people. So she won, and then I got appointed anyway because someone else quit. And that was my first political job on a school board. And it was a hard job, but I really liked it because I felt like I was making a contribution and I belonged to something. So anyway, after that, at some point, somebody else asked me to run for state representative because someone else quit. Well, I really had never thought I'd do that, but that's what I ended up doing. And so it just shows you that sometimes you get into these things in a very serendipitous way, which means you weren't planning it exactly, but someone asked me. And I think that's what we found. We did a study as soon as I came into office called the Civic Health Index. And that's how I got here tonight, really. Because we wanted to find out, it was a project where we were asking people, doing a survey of people in the state to find out how they felt about their civic life. Did they feel like they were part of anything in their town, in their state, in their country, for that matter? Did they vote? First of all, that's one indicator of whether people are involved. Did they have dinner with their family? How many times a week? Do they know their neighbors? Do you know who lives next door to you? Have you ever worked with anyone in your town or your neighbor on a problem, to solve a problem in your town? Do you read a newspaper? Or what do you read? Do you communicate? How do you communicate? Do you belong to a church? Do you belong to another association? So we gathered all that information, and it told us some very interesting things. And one of them was what I just said before. People get involved when someone asks them. They don't just sit around, and say, oh, I think I'll just run for the school board. It doesn't happen that way. And I think that's a really big message for all of us, that we need to reach out to other people, and that's kind of what I'm doing here, and say, we want you in. We want you to be a participant in your public life of the community. People are very cynical right now about government and about even, local government, and we want them to start trying to solve some of these problems along with us, not just in isolation out there. We found out that some groups of people vote more than others. We found out that about a third of people who are eligible to vote aren't even registered to vote. And that's very different than it has been in the past. I have noticed that when people talk about, what are they going to do on election day, and some people will say, I might get around to it. I'm not sure. It depends what I'm doing. There's nobody to vote for, so my vote doesn't count anyway. You hear all kinds of things like that. I'll tell you, when I grew up in the 1950s, you wouldn't say that, even if you thought it. Because you would say, it's my duty to vote. You would never say, well, I'll vote if I get around to it. It's just a different attitude now. And I think it's a real problem for all of us, especially among younger people. They don't feel that same duty, that same obligation as a citizen. And that is a problem. So we need to find ways to bring people in, and we need to find ways to make all this public life important to people, make them understand how important it is. And I don't need to tell you probably that one of the groups that's the lowest number of voters, voting people of their population, is the Hispanic group. We found that of eligible Hispanic voters in the state, as near as we can tell, these are kind of estimates because, of course, difficult to tell who's Hispanic. You get into all these discussions about what does that mean? Do you just take their last name? How do you know? But our best guesstimate on this is that about 50% of eligible Hispanic voters are actually registered to vote. Just half. That's much less than any other ethnic group, including African American. And of that 50%, only 23% actually vote, which is a very interesting statistic to me because, people who would register and then not vote, why would you bother? But I guess, maybe somebody got them registered, but in the end, not enough people who actually are eligible and registered even vote. Why is that happening? And we tried to ask those questions. And it's interesting because even though people reported very low numbers of people worked with neighbors or even knew who lived next door to them, something like 8% of Connecticut voters or Connecticut citizens said they had ever worked with a neighbor on a problem in their neighborhood. That's a very low number, and we're looking, countrywide now. There's about 30 states that have now done this kind of an index. So if they're not talking to each other, who are they talking to? And that was kind of the next question. We found out a lot of people are talking to other people, just not in a political way. There are big numbers of people who associate with each other mostly through their church or other kind of association, sometimes civic associations, sometimes clubs like this. This provides a community forum for a group of people. So how do we translate that into political and civic action and civic life